All right. Good evening, everyone. So we'll be taking over from where we left in the previous class. So we are trying to combine both static and the historical issues. Take this more like a session on your brainstorming. When you are preparing with your static textbooks and you also have triggers from current news, what are those important facts which were asked in the previous year questions? Thematically, what current issues would be equally relevant for you? We're trying to club together and present it in a coherent manner. So, I'm not just going to deliver facts, just like in every class, I would want you to do some background work because this interlinking is possible only when you sit with the textbooks, sit with the news items. My job would be to bring them on a common platform so that the context is worked for you, and once you get the context, you will find it easy to memorize some facts. At the same time, I would parallelly want you to do the previous year questions from respective topics so that you develop the necessary background thought process both for prelims as well as mains simultaneously. That is how you can prepare. Now, let's say, for example, this issue we were discussing, the tribal heritage, Birsa Munda and Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. So the overall theme that we have to have a look at is the contributions of tribals and how they resisted colonial power. So there are two kinds of questions possible, one at the prelims level and two at the mains level. When you're talking about the prelims level questions, since this is history, you will have two set of questions. One is timeline based at different, let's say 16 or 1700, 1800, 1900 till independence 1947. On this timeline, the various tribal movements, if you take the larger theme of tribal movements, see, you will see peasant and tribal revolts in your spectrum textbook, right? And they're all chunked together like a huge block of information, which makes it very clumsy in your head. How do you declutter that? So, if you use this specific news item as a trigger for revising the entire theme of tribal revolts, this is how you can do it. Now, let's say when you are reading this news, you won't be thinking about the background story. That background story we will see now. See, tribal movements are just another manifestation of the colonial attitude towards the locals. It's just that these people have a hyper-local strategy to contain the Britishers. They tried their best. So, whenever you see their resistance methods, at each geographical location, you will see a unique method. Having said that, you will also see some commonalities. Okay. As far as the mains level is concerned, you will be seeing UPSC asking, across the country, there are many tribal revolts in different periods of time. One set of questions can be about comparison between two major tribal revolts. Or they will be asking, compare and contrast the major revolts itself or leaders themselves. Or they will just say, what is common between all of these tribal revolts? So these are the three kinds of questions that you can expect from mains level. Now, at the prelims level, what kind of questions can you expect? Majorly, they will be around personalities. So when you are preparing for tribal personalities, especially in the context of Janjatiya Divas, first, I want you to chunk the information in this manner. First, you divide the entire country into north, south, east, west. This is the first classification. Second is, arrange them let's say for example, if you're picking up East India tribals, because this is the most important region. East Indian tribals, you have to have 3 layers. The first layer would be timeline. You arrange the major tribal revolts on a specific chronological order. Then the second layer would be geography. Why am I talking about geography in the context of tribals? Their lifestyle depends on the geography that they are residing in. Okay. If you understand the geography, one, you will understand why the Britishers wanted to be in that place. Maybe they had some mineral wealth, maybe they had some forest wealth, or a combination of both. Or they just wanted manpower to use these tribals to tame them and make them a part of the empire. Timeline, geography, and when you are talking about their struggle, their method and purpose. After this is clear, then you can talk about leaders. My intent is not just to give you information, you can find them in books. It is about training your mind to think in certain logical blocks. You have to first take away the resistance in your mind. If you have to prepare tribal revolts, what is common between all of them? All of them didn't want their autonomy to be taken away. It is not like they wanted British out of this country. In that place, if there is any other person also or any other community also, they would have reacted in the same way. Because what did they want? They wanted autonomy. When this fight for autonomy is common between all those sections, the historians tried to combine them under a unifying theme called tribal revolts. Once we start respecting their contribution to the Indian culture and history, you will assimilate them within the society. This is the larger idea of recognizing subaltern as well as tribal contributions to history. What do you mean by subaltern history? When you are talking about history, it's usually about those who have held power. The victors. What about people who were contributing at that point of time for the growth of that empire? Subaltern history, regional history, and the hitherto unaddressed parts of history like tribal revolts, peasant revolts, commoners. This is an evolving theme in history in UPSC. The same information that is present right in front of us as a huge chunk of information, when you don't have a context, it is very likely that you will forget it. So that is why you have to establish association, geographical association. See if they are of same timeline. See if there is a possibility of a commonality between two people at two different time periods. Usually there is a theme. Whenever a question says in UPSC that two people are contemporaries, it's usually false. It's a pattern that was asked in previous year questions. Now when you're preparing those previous year questions, those personalities, you should know a bit, or like I would say more about them. Let's say 17 or 18, somewhere around that time, there was this question. Annamacharya or one more person, like there were two people compared. Usually they are not of the same time period. I don't remember the exact question. Sorry. So usually there will be a question like this. You won't find them to be contemporary. So these are the multiple questions that are possible on this theme. This is the larger methodology of preparing this theme. Always remember, it is not the current affairs, not the fact that really makes a difference in your preparation. Our mind is trained to remember the context, not the fact. So always prepare the context first. Let the facts slip in at a later point of time because it will be easy for you. Okay, this is how you prepare the theme of tribal revolts. Now, what do you think they were resisting? Like I said, they wanted their autonomy. Who were taking away their autonomy? Either the money lenders who were harassing them or the Britishers who were trying to take away their land from them. Or three, a combination of both. A nexus between the money lenders, local kings and the Britishers. So they were resisting this. When they have the advantage of knowing their own geography better, what is the most common method of warfare they used? It's called guerrilla warfare. They used to take advantage of the geography to hide and use that camouflage technique to attack the Britishers. Usually you will find questions on this set of facts only. Depending on the context of the question, you need to retrieve all these facts and arrange them in a certain order. This is how you prepare for the theme of tribal revolts. Now, if I have to summarize the news context also, let's see what those points are. So we are talking about Birsa Munda, who is a tribal leader and is famous for us. Which movement? It's a previous year question. Ulgulan. Okay. So there was a system where a joint land ownership system is there. In that context, this Ulgulan became very famous. That name of the system is that Kunkatti. Okay. So the slogan you see in, I forgot to add this parallel, Jal Jungle Zameen of Komaram Bhim. In the previous class, I forgot to add this name. The parallels that you see, you must have all watched this movie RRR, and that's the reason why you all remember it even more vividly. In that context, you would see that person was traveling across the country. History says that, in fact, Komaram Bhim was inspired by this event, Ulgulan, and he understood the method of organizing the rebellions against the British. So when he came back, learning from all the methods, he went to Assam. He worked in the tea plantations of Assam. And once he came back, this tribal sovereignty as a concept, where tribal should own these three: Jal, Jungle and Zameen. Water, forest and land. To exercise their authority, that was the takeaway. So, in previous year questions, majorly you will find some repetitive names. Alluri Sitaramaraju, Komaram Bhim, Birsa Munda. When you're talking about Odisha, there are many other leaders. Any leader that you can recollect from Odisha? Not exactly a tribal leader, but a famous leader from Orissa. Who are Pikes? I asked you this question the other day also. Paika rebellion. Any idea? Surendra Sai. This is a option, one of the option, if not maybe around 1996. In one of the option you will find this name, Surendra Sai. He is a famous leader of Orissa. You should know who this person is. I also gave you one more clue. Have a look at the major international airports of every state. See who they are named after. You can expect a question around that personality too. Why? What is the link between airport and personalities? No, it's one of the nomenclature. Generally, if you take a look at it, whoever is the predominant personality of that region is now respected by the government by attributing that person's name with that region through airports. So that, why at airport? Because it is a hub of international tourism. The minute they land They're named after that person. It's an opportunity for spreading the name of that person across the world. So it's a strategic location. And that's the reason why they're named. For example, if you are not from Karnataka, how likely is it that you would know a personality like Kempe Gowda existed? Very unlikely. Right? So this is the context. Now, Lachit Borpukhan. Ever heard this name? Where? What is the context? General for Ahom, or did he fight Mughals, or was he on the side of Mughals? So these are the kind of personalities that news items are picking up, and in the last few years there is rising prominence of these themes. I gave you one more fact also. What is that? Assam, Ahom kingdom. Any idea? Ahom kingdom history. History's chronicles. You won't find this information in normal textbooks. This is there in newspapers. That's the reason I'm giving this. What is the name of Burunjis? You have to know this. Okay? Ahom kingdom, Assam. Also, this was asked many times in UGC NET. Clear? So you need to know these kind of issues. Anyway. Just some major tribal revolts and the comparison. So if I have to create confusing options, I might say Birsa Munda advocated for Christian conversion. There was nothing like that. Ulgulan was the first tribal resistance against British rule. No, that's not the case. You had Santal rebellion even before that. Where is the Santal rebellion location? Chota Nagpur Plateau. What is the geography of Chota Nagpur Plateau? Like, what would you have above and below? How familiar are you with Indian geography and landforms? Where is Malda Gap? Any idea? So I'll give you a point of reference. So this is one more interesting way you can prepare. How to prepare geography and history together. Take your Indian geography mapping. Observe the geography points and take 4 or 5 maps. Ancient India, medieval India, modern India, or let's say 7th century, 11th century, 13th century, 17th century. Take those maps and at different points of time, see how the map is changing, the political map is changing, and map that political maps change to the underlying social structure, like how the society is also changing at the same time. Are they utilizing their geography or not? At one point in medieval India, you will notice that science and technology almost came to a standstill. The major characteristic feature of medieval across the world, not just in India, is the stagnation in the growth of science and tech. As a result, you would parallelly notice that economy also stagnates. That culminated into the 18th century Jagirdari crisis of Mughal Empire. Anyway, coming back. This is how I would want you to prepare the entire theme of tribals. Geography, timelines, purpose, method, and outcome. Any famous personalities, especially in the eastern part of the country, name them correctly and know the history behind it from your static textbooks. This is how I want you to prepare the theme of tribal revolts. Clear? This is how we will be proceeding thematically. So obviously it's not just a fact that I'm reading out. It will take a slightly more time because I have to map all these issues to make more sense. Are you with me? Moving on. Next. See, usually when you see any major landmark year, like 50th year, 100th year, 75, 100, 150, 200, whatever is the number, usually UPSC will pick up that theme and ask questions around it. Usually, let's say for example, after 1 or 2 years, that will again be brought back by UPSC. Let's say if this is the 150th year, there is a chance that they will ask, but usually in recent times, they started asking this once it is out of public memory. But you should anyway be prepared. If they decide to change the trend, you should be prepared. So that's the reason I'm asking you to prepare. Arya Samaj. Where will you find this? The entire theme of socio-religious reforms. If you are reading from your Spectrum textbook, what is the trouble you face when you are reading socio-religious reforms? See, the entire chapter socio-religious reforms, how is it organized? When you think of it, text is organized as a cluster of random information. You can't map the timeline again. Which one came before, which one came after, who is working for what cause, what is the direction, is there a parallel coexistence of two different trends, are they fighting against each other, are they working towards each other, one after the other, no clarity. Let's say for example, if I ask you, within a specific community, let's say Islamic revivalism as a theme, you have Ahmadiyya movement, Wahhabi movement. Firstly, the minute I mention this, people get, the first thing they want to do is recollect the name of the leader rather than the purpose. So, at what time period, which geography and why were they taking the stance they are taking? You don't understand the context at all. Now, if I isolate this context completely and talk about Arya Samaj, Dayananda Saraswati, and talk about Bring Back Vedas and the consequences it had in 1920s and the rise of communal politics, it will not make any sense to you. This is the problem of the way we read this topic. Previously, many years ago, UPSC used to ask just factual information from history. Let's say for example, who said back to Vedas? You are no longer going to get this kind of questions. You will have to understand the context, read it in a comparative lens, see one historical event as a culmination of the events that happened before it. And next event is a consequence of whatever is happening now. It's like a chain reaction. Multiple pathways exist. Like say for example, are you saying that, let's say for example, in 1920s, I'm not even specifying the geography. We are talking about a undivided country. So, what is the birthplace of Dayanand Saraswati? Any idea? Lahore. Where is Lahore today? So, I'm talking about 1920s Lahore. What is the birthplace of Lala Lajpat Rai? Any idea? Lahore. If you have to classify Lala Lajpat Rai, was he a moderate extremist, Swarajist? How would you place him? Extremist in what sense? The word will have completely different meaning in today's world. Who is an extremist in the context of Indian history? Now, time period before that, we are in 1875. Why is this event significant? Any idea? 1875, what happened? Roughly, let's say 1870s. In the context of this socio-religious reform movements, anything significant happened at that time? Let's come even back. What is this event? What is this year? In the context of socio-religious reforms, why is this year famous? Missionaries were allowed. Do you think East India Company wanted missionaries? Because they are also Christians, these people are also Christians, they should have allowed. Why aren't they allowing? It's all confusing, right? In fact, it is about what happened before this. There is something called Glorious Revolution in England. So when you read history like a chain of events, one transpiring into another, each sub branches adding to this fuel, it'll all snowball into some events. And that is how you have to read history. They are never going to be isolated from that context. So when you're reading socio-religious reform movements, India as a society is having two major themes that needs to be addressed. Social justice corrections needed to be worked upon in two dimensions. What are those two dimensions? Your spectrum also mentions that. One is with respect to the caste issue. Two, it is with respect to the women issue. So, apart from these two, you also have other issues like religious revival or religious reform. Because there were many thinkers who were trying to work on religion in different parts of the country, in different methods. One says they are revivalist, one says they are reformist. Why are they taking that stance? It's all unclear. So to unpack all of this and rewire our understanding of history, I will give you a specific lens to understand the metrics so that you can remember this better. I'm not going to teach you socio-religious reforms. I'm only going to tell you the method in which you have to prepare. Once you go back to the same spectrum textbook and read it, you will read it in a different lens. That will help you retain the context better. Okay. So, what is the context here? Why? What is the purpose? Like, why only in 18th and 19th century we started thinking about socio-religious reforms? Why? Because this method is important for you to remember. Did you think why? The answer is there in the first page of your spectrum only. Introduction of Western education. So, are you of the opinion that until the introduction of Western education, we were not even thinking of our Indian society? Are you telling me that it's because of English education only we started knowing about ourselves? Okay, that's after, that's a consequence. Why I'm talking about this time period. Why did we start thinking about socio-religious reforms? Okay, so do you think French Revolution has anything to do with Indian society at that time? It's all about money. I'll tell you how. Once the power transfer happened, once the English consolidated their power, they realized it's too difficult to manage without manpower here. The problem is they didn't understand our language and we didn't understand theirs. We were hell bent on sticking to our language. They tried to adapt, but we were not accepted. We were not accepting. The initial efforts were towards understanding our language. The Orientalist approach in early 1770s. Right after the Battle of Plassey, you will see the Orientalist approach. Here is where, if you go to education chapter in Spectrum, you will be seeing the initial efforts by the British to establish madrasas, Sanskrit college. Why Sanskrit? Why madrasa? Why Sanskrit? Why madrasa? Always across history, even when political science as a modern concept never came into existence, it was always about legitimacy. At that point of time, Hindus predominantly had their religious texts, which was the source of power and laws, in Sanskrit. Any idea about the name Jimutavahana or Manusmriti? Which were the early legal treatises? What language were they in? Okay, even if most of the people didn't understand Sanskrit, why did they still go back to this text? Because indirectly, informally also, the society is organized on the principles established in this text. The other side of the coin, the other section of the society, madrasas. They wanted to establish madrasas to understand the Persian literature, Arabic literature. At the time, Urdu did not peak yet. Why Persian? Why Arabic and all these languages? Because the Mughal rulers had historical lineage and their texts were in Turkish, Persian and Arabic, which created the legal customs followed by Muslims at that point of time. So the initial efforts did not pay much result because it was, one, unsustainable, two, it was not yielding the result, three, there was extreme resistance, ideological resistance from Britain. Remember this point, East India Company is just a private company that came to make money and it was making money. It's not a political power. The day the British government understood that India is a source to make a lot of money, they started to invest more time. The day they saw that this social factions that existed in Indian society is a very fertile ground for religious conversions and Christian missionaries, they were also interested to come to India. But English East India Company didn't want these Christian missionaries, primarily because they would take away the power. When you have to compare religious power and economic power, history has always proven that religious power is much more powerful. Even on the parallel lines, if you see the Portuguese strategy, God, gold and glory, it was packaged together. Political power was packaged with money as well as religion. Clear? So, the bitter experience of the Portuguese, even the East India Company feared Portuguese in the initial days. The rivalry was very bitter. And in the initial days, Portuguese were very cruel. The methods were very cruel. Okay. So, considering all these experiences, they didn't want the Christian missionaries to be a part of this. So, back in England, there was a huge pressure to introduce English education. One, because it's not, yielding much result. They wanted the ideological forces. They wanted supremacy of English to have control over the minds of people. Okay, that economic agenda transpired into a bit by bit introduction of some kind of a measure, some kind of a monetary infusion, legislative infusion into Indian culture that transformed and introduced this so-called English education through the Macaulay's Minute, which created the workforce. Of course, the points that you mentioned, like getting exposure to French Revolution ideas, etc., is a consequence of this action, but the primary event that shifted the balance is the economic compulsion to create a workforce. Why did Indians accept to be a part of this? Because their traditional economic structures were dismantled because of the British. Your agrarian class is destroyed. The Jagirdari crisis became even more worse with zamindari methods. Artisans lost their jobs. The patrons who held many people, the educated class, the kings at that point of time, even when Mughal suzerainty was accepted, what happened to the painters, potters, or artists, musicians? Where will they go? They need some kind of a survival. There is a professional class like your accountants, lawyers, bookkeepers, treasurers. They need to be hired by someone, otherwise they don't know anything else. Service economy. The working class were doing their job. Even when the situation is pretty bad, they were still working because that's the only thing they know. But what about this class who had to find an alternative employment, and to find an alternative employment, they were forced to take up education that is accepted. Just like how many of you are reading these optional subjects because UPSC wants you to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be picking up these subjects anyway. That's exactly how they were forced to pick up this new education. And that created the initial friction point. On one hand, just for your own visual, you will see on one hand, let's say if you take a society on a same pedestal, one section of the society is okay to read more and more. Other part of the society is still at that point. There is an ideological clash within the society. So at that point, there are two pathways to take. Okay? Reform completely or revive after making some small changes. The socio-religious reform movement has these two tracks. And why one path took revivalism, why one path took reforms, completely depends on who they are. Usually you would see these reform movements come from extremely educated class. Again, always remember that when reason takes over, take a look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Self-actualization. Once you get education, once you get acceptance in a society, you will ultimately move towards something that gives you respect. That is what the educated class, they found their purpose in fixing that inhuman conditions. And this is how the reform movement started increasing. And this is not just confined to one region or one religion, it is everywhere. Hindus, Muslims, Parsis, Sikhs, the methods might vary, the names might vary, the strategies might vary, but everybody wanted one common thing. What is that? Human dignity. Everybody were trying to do whatever they can for this human dignity, to treat everybody equally. And this is the religious trend. On the sidelines, you will also see a completely agnostic side or atheistic side, which spoke about the philosophy of humanism. You would find more and more takers in communists. Ironically, the same philosophy also has commonality with Vedanta, where Swami Vivekananda also says the same thing. Manava Seve Madhava Seva, or service to mankind is service to God, where you are trying to bring that human element, that dignity back to the common discourse. This is the background. In this, whenever you are reading, you will always have two warring factions. Okay? If one says revival, the other one will say reform. They need not be sitting across the table always. They can be from two different time periods. Let's say in one time period, a predominant thought is there. After that, they will say, no, we will not accept this. Let's subscribe to this new thought. Like this, you will have to rewire your understanding of the socio-religious reforms and relook at the facts. Arrange them as a reaction to a existing trend. Why was it happening? Who are the proponents? What is the consequence? What happened after that? Once you read it like that, all of them will converge together and you will see how multiple events will converge together in the 1920s and get politicized. If you are reading GS1, Indian Society, Communalism and Regionalism, the starting point of understanding that will be in 1920s. Non-cooperation movement, Khilafat movement, and what happened after that till partition. As a consequence of the partition and the clashes that existed within our country, you will see this topic. So the genesis is something that we see in 7th, 11th, 19th till 21st century. See this as a continuous work in progress, where democratization of access to religion was happening before that. Prior to this, you had the Shramana traditions of Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika cult, so on and so forth. So it was always like a continuous event happening one after the other. If you don't read it like this, it will be a chunk of isolated facts that you're trying to mug up. It won't sit in your memory for a long term. Clear? Now, coming back to the issue here. These points are something that are straight from your spectrum. You know this Shuddhi movement existed. Can you tell me where, why, how? Spectrum doesn't give you that context. If you don't understand the context but the fact, how will you appreciate its importance in our historical canvas? Why am I reading about it? Why is it relevant for the present day? If you are someone posted in an area where this thought process is a part of their culture and you're culturally insensitive, you should know the consequence, because like I told you, human beings are a combination of logic and emotion. You should recognize the emotion part. So these parts, yes. Next. Now, when you're talking about the ancient ports of India, before that, there is one more point, Pattanamarudar excavations. So there is a place, again, when we are talking about the history of urbanization, we are again going back into the ancient era. Are you following me? We are going back into ancient era from 2500 BC. Before that, it is prehistory. Then we are talking about 600 BC, 0. let's say 1947 and present times. When you're talking about the urbanization era in Indian history, what comes to your mind? First, urbanization. What about Sangam age? Is it not urbanization? Sangam age is the first urbanization in South India. Okay, please understand that. The entire contemporary controversy is about the timeline of the second urbanization. Second urbanization in North India is Mahajanapada period. Now with the Keeladi excavation, you are saying that even South India had a similar growth in urban stories. Now you have to ask, both the regions might be having urban culture, but urban culture is a consequence. What is the cause? The reason is not uniform. In the northern part of the country, it is agrarian surplus. In the southern part, we have ample evidence that it is maritime trade and industrialization. So you would witness evidences for this from archaeology, from literature. Okay. So as far as the archaeology part is concerned, you will witness lithic age, like megalithic era in these times. They correspond to what? Your burial practices. Okay. So they will tell you about the material culture. In your burial mounds, what would you find? So there were ample evidences of coinage. So today we will be, like, since we started at 5:15, we'll be taking it till 6:15. Okay. So you will witness the material culture there, and the present excavations are talking about what kind of material culture was there and what is its implication. So if you read the news here, it is talking about high concentrations of iron slag, shell bangles, and other material evidences directly point it to the Roman market. What did I tell you? South Indian urbanization is about trade. So South India will have a very strong influence with Roman Empire. Okay. It is in this context you will have to understand both seaports and river ports, which is the next topic. Okay. Now, some famous sites. I asked you to go back and see the Neolithic, Paleolithic, Mesolithic sites of South India. Adichannallur is one of them. Okay. In Kurnool region also you have one site. Okay. In Karnataka, one more site is there, Hungsi. I want you to prepare on these sites. Belan Valley, Hungsi. In the Kashmir region, you have Burzahom, which is a Neolithic site. Some important archaeological sites, just because they were asked in previous year questions, become important. So please prepare. You can get any question. On the eastern part, you will have Chandraketugarh, Sisupalgarh, Tamralipti in the Bengal region. These sites will again be important for you. Chandraketugarh was asked as late as 2021. Okay. So please, you need to have these names on your fingertips. Adichannallur, for example, take a look at this. Pattana Marudar is a relatively new information for the UPSC community because of the news. So here you will see industries. Adi Chanalu is known for its burial practices and information of the social life of those people. And Keeladi gave us an understanding of the urban lifestyle. When you stitch together these evidences, you are trying to recreate the historical scene of that time period. That's why these individual excavations and these discoveries are equally important. Just like how Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Kalibangan, and Rakigari, each of these sites are like clues for different aspects. At Lothal, you will find one thing. Dholavira, you will find one thing. At Rakigari, you are finding one more thing. Kalibangan, you will find one aspect. When you stitch them together, do carbon dating, see they are contemporaries. The material evidences you pick up from this, it's like a puzzle. You will try to recreate history like this. Why is UPSC asking these sites? Because they all have a common thread. They all belong to a specific time period. And at each site, you are getting one new evidence, and that new evidence is giving you an opportunity to reconstruct history. Pattana Marudar is therefore important in the context of South Indian history for this reason. So if I have to generalize, I'm trying to help you create a guesstimate framework. You will have to remember some names, but I don't want you to, in the initial days, don't want you to take a load of these names. So I'm giving you the context. Let's not worry about the names. You have the Indian map. Okay. So the east is there, west coast is there. Take a look at the west coast. What will you trade generally? See, at that point of time, you don't have mechanization of boats. You will have to rely on monsoon. And it is simply impractical to start from Chennai and then take a U-turn and go towards Roman Empire. It is difficult. We don't have mechanization. For this practical limitation, most of the trade started from the western coast. When you start your trade from the western coast, what will be the likely material you'll find? Something that those people need. Right? What did they need? What did they not have? Why did they come to India? It was always about spices. So, the pepper coast, like the deep sea ports like Muziris or Bharuch, directly linked India to the Roman Empire. They were taking use of the monsoons, and in return, what were we taking? We will be having gold. Roman coins you will find here. Two, we will be taking, like the kings at that point of time used to import luxurious wine, etc. The Golden Coast on the east side. Just one more point. If you have watched Kantara movie, the latest one, what will they trade from a deep forest? Spices, basically. Kantara is a movie from Karnataka, western coast. Strictly speaking, Kundapura, for example, the region where this entire legend of Kantara story is there. Even as per the fiction in that movie, kingdoms, which kingdom was discussed in that movie? Any idea? How many of you watched it? What time period Kadambas were there in Karnataka? Think once. So they were doing what? Spice trade. And where would they send it likely? Roman Empire. Western coast, Roman Empire. So if you are someone in Karnataka, what is the nearest port? Mangalore port. Many decades later, the same Mangalore port becomes the hub of another influential king of that region. Who's that person? Tipu Sultan. In that region, you will find the famous Bhatkal port near Mangalore, which is also a suspected hub for sleeper cells in the present time. If you see the news, there is a lot of discussion on this Bhatkal port as the hub for the maritime security issues. There is another port in that region called the Honavar port. It is not a port exactly, it's a hub. It's a hub where Indian Navy has one dedicated space. If you go back to history, this Bharuch port, Kalyan port, Sopara, Muziris, all this Gujarat to Kerala on the western coast, they were all, sending products to the western part of the world. The same products for which today you are likely to see GI tags, because that is what they specialize in. Your geography will not change your destiny forever. Like, if once geography decides something, unless climate change fixes to change that, you will always have that historical advantage. So see commonalities. You have to be curious, and this is how I want you to think. When you take a look at the east coast, you will see a lot of riverine ports. Can you tell me why riverine ports are important here? Think on geographical lines. See, it is not a coincidence that we have riverine ports on the east and just seaports on the west. Exactly. The slope is very not so steep. It's a gradual slope. But on the western side, it's steep. So, deltas are not formed there. Navigating into the country, inland transport is not possible. So, it is not a coincidence that the eastern part of the country, like Magadha, saw prominence and exploited wealth more than the western part in the initial days, because agricultural surplus was easy to move through these riverine ports. That is why UPSC also, whenever you find ports on any riverine ports, search for anything that is there in eastern part and southern part. Motupalli, for example, or Tamralipti, Hugli. All these ports on the eastern part, they became possible because of the delta region, the gradual slopes. Alluvial soils facilitated the agricultural surplus. On the banks of this rivers, they were produced, loaded onto ships, taken into the sea, went elsewhere. And this is a phenomenon more important in 8th century Cholas, which will take us to the next topic. So, broadly speaking, this is the classification. It's very logical that if you are on the west, you will take it to the Roman Empire, and on the east, you will take it to China. There is one exception though. I'll talk about that exception. Let me come back. Okay. Quickly, let me also tell you some more points that will help you memorize this content. See, always remember that as a matter of logic, whenever there is trade, it's natural that we will buy something in only two cases. One, when we don't have it. Two, when it is cheap. Only two cases. Cheap and costly is not a phenomenon at that point of time, primarily because globalization is not there. And they wouldn't risk their lives to come across the sea for a packet of pepper. It is now lying across my table now, but isn't it surprising that people risked their lives for this packet many centuries ago? Now we are not caring about it. It feels illogical because, you know what, maybe in Africa I'll get it for 20 rupees, but India is selling at 10 rupees. Why not take out a ship and travel across the world. We might as well die on the route, but let's do it anyway. No, that's not how it was. Like most likely, there is a deficit. Understand the geography of that region, which will help you understand the biomes concept. Different climatic regions, different in geography, will produce different things. Let's say, for example, why would you find champagne only in that region? Why is it so famous? Why is it the export product of the world? It's because of geography. So if you can combine these geographical elements with history, it's curious and it's also interesting that way. Anyway, remember that geography always played the role. Monsoon was there. There was no mechanization at that point. And at every point, if there was no revenue for it, the kingdoms wouldn't be interested in nurturing that ecosystem. Why would I build a port if it is not giving me a revenue? So there is always revenue aspect to it. And because it is a hub where merchants and different cultures come together, you will witness exchange of ideas. And it is at that point, history's trajectories always change. The ideas travel at these points, and those points become historically very significant. No matter where we are talking about, at least it will have, regionally it will have a lot of significance. Similarly, there is another new site called Junakathya. The point that you have to understand here is, if you take a look at the entire civilization, Indus Valley civilization, again it is divided into three phases: early, middle and mature. We are talking about a early phase. So if you have to do a comparative analysis of these two sites, one is talking about a very basic stuff like burial rituals, etc. But at a later point, you are seeing in a mature site, you are seeing trade and industry. So this explains the evolution of that culture. Now, Pattana Marudar also exhibited this kind of a trajectory. So can you compare the conditions in, let's say, a place like Lothal and a place like Pattana Marudar? This is the kind of questions you will get in UPSC. In 2014, they asked, what will you learn from Indus Valley civilization urbanization? How is it relevant in present times? Is there any comparison logic? No. They want to see your analytical ability. And this is how you have to prepare. One more site, Zehanpura. Again, this is a site in Kashmir. I'm taking you back to the time period where Kushans were there in Kushana kingdom. The Gandhara culture that you see. I would call the Kushan period as a Mahayana laboratory. They were trying to experiment with Buddhist philosophy and the Greek realism. What do you mean by realism? Trying to depict sculptures in such a way that it's as if human beings are standing there. It's a replica, very realistic. Okay, so that is the time period in which you will find this site. Of late, there is again a discussion on this. Few years earlier, in one of the French museums, transcripts or some details, artifacts pointed to this region, which prompted Archaeological Survey of India to dig deeper into this region. At such a high altitude, when you found Roman coins and cultural elements that are linked to these regions, we could logically map it to the Kushan period, and also this Zehanpura became a transit point in what we know as the Silk Route from China to Central Asia. Again, same theme. Whenever there is a major route, on that route you will see not just economic prosperity but also cultural prosperity. In this region, you will see many pilgrims like Yuan Sang, they came to this region. So you will find some Buddhist stupas also. Naturally, because of the time period and the patrons there, you will find Gandhara. And if you get a comparative question, the contrasting element would be something like Sanchi. Because this is a Mahayana, this is a Hinayana time period one. Okay. So like this, you can have comparative questions. And you can create points like this. Recently, there was a archaeological evidence about the mythological city, which now has some facts, Dwaraka. Because what is Dwaraka? The historical city of which is attributed to Lord Krishna. Even though Mahabharata was never written through the oral tradition without much deviation, it passed on from one generation to another. In that story, you will find the link to Dwaraka. So, the latest archaeological evidence is when you map it to the historical oral tradition and the stories behind it, there is a convergence of these facts, which point to the climate change aspect. Just like how Indus Valley civilization, again on the western part of the country, has undergone a rapid climate change driven change, or it got phased out. Maybe there is a possibility of climate change impacting a city that existed there. If you take a look at the geological history of this, again, geological history of India, when you talk about Western Ghats, there is, how did Western Ghats come into existence? Is it because of the fold mountains or is it because of the block mountains? The part that is, on the left just sunk. For the lack of a better word, I'm just saying that it went inside. Maybe Dwaraka was on that part which went underneath. Today we are talking about impact of climate change, which is GS1 syllabus. You will see similarities here also. So when you take a look at this, okay, you will notice some similarities here, which we will again discuss in the next class. So what is the takeaway from today's class? You spoke about how we have to study tribal revolts. We saw socio-religious reforms. We saw what else? Ports, riverine ports. On the western front, you have this seaports, the major locations, how to memorize them. In the subsequent classes also, we will be approaching the subject in a similar way. Do you think this is waste of time or it is going to help you? You are not going to get benefit out of this class if you're just coming and sitting and moving back. You need to follow it up with at least 15 to 25 minutes coverage of the topics that we discussed. Once you do it, you will learn how to have these interlinkages. Until your mind struggles to create that interlinkage, you are not going to excel in this exam. No matter what kind of question paper comes, you will be able to do it. This is how you will have to develop the MCQ aptitude. Okay? See you in the next class.